So I'd like to welcome you to this presentation of Majesty and Mystery of Crop Circles. And my name is John Root. I'm a naturalist. I've done this program many times at libraries and senior centers. It's a fascinating topic, for sure. I didn't know, and I should say from the outset that this program is funded by a grant from the Hopkinton Cultural Council, so I want to thank the Cultural Council for funding this event. So I didn't know anything about this phenomenon until about 10 years ago. I read a book called Secrets in the Fields by Freddie Silva. Up until that time, I had only vaguely heard about crop circles, and I thought of them as being something that happened in the 80s, and maybe people made them and maybe they didn't, and that kind of thing. I had no idea that they were happening every year. And since the 80s, they've been happening every year, and they've been becoming more and more complex, really. And there's such a wonderful variety of patterns. Perhaps looking at this cover slide here, this might be the first time that you've ever seen such a thing, right? When you think crop circles, perhaps you think circles. And as you can see, you're seeing a lot more than circles. I mean, you are seeing a lot of circles, but you're also seeing straight lines, you're seeing patterns. So on with the show, and I want to explain that in my research, I discovered that crop circles were not the only mysteriously appearing patterns out there on terra firma, so or on water for that matter. So this term terraglyph is a word that you can use to talk about anything, any mysterious designs, whether they're on land, any part of the land, not just crops, or on water. For example, here's one back in the mid-1970s, a circle. No question that that's a perfect circle. And is there a natural explanation for that? You know, that circle of ice? Well, we don't really know, but you'll see a lot of them. Now, here's the first photograph that I have that I've been able to find of a crop circle. 1978, there were actually 5 of these large circles in the field. If you roll a die and you get 5, that's what the pattern looked like. And there's the farmer's wife and her 2 daughters leaving the field. But I will say that previous generations of farmers and their families share many memories of, in fact, sometimes people will say, I remember when I was a child, we would play in them, you know, in those mysteriously appearing circles. So they certainly have been happening for quite some time. And now let's pause and think about, well, what is the meaning of a circle? Is there a possibility here that we're looking at sacred geometry? Is it a sacred symbol? After all, those people who study such things certainly believe that, yes, the circle is in fact a symbol of ineffable oneness, the indivisible fulfillment of the universe, and we could think of the circle as being a 2-dimensional representation of the sphere, which is itself an ultimate expression of unity, completeness, and integrity. So perhaps these circles are meant to be inspiring to us. And now, speaking of the history of crop circles, let's go way back. 1686. Robert Plot was a naturalist, and I'm a naturalist, so I experienced an affinity for him. And when he saw this in the field, and he was writing a book about the natural history of Staffordshire, well, he felt obliged to come up with at least some explanation of what had caused what he saw. And this is what he came up with, this illustration of something coming from the skies, a funnel shape with a square shape inside that would have created the design that he saw. Now, fast forward to 1983. 1 large circle in the center and 4 in the shape of what some people think might be a Celtic cross. And you can imagine how it really got people's attention, right? And the next year, Sir Dennis Healy's wife saw a bright red light over the field when this was being, and these are almost all formed in the middle of the night. So she saw a bright red light over the field when this happened. And in this case, again, the same pattern that we're seeing here. In 1985, a strange white substance was found in the formation, which was thought to have been responsible for everybody developing severe chest complaints who smelled it. Yes, you have a question?
Yes. Could you give us location locations on these?
These are all, virtually all the images that you have already seen and will be seeing are in southern England. The counties of Hampshire and Wiltshire in southern England. So there's a natural question, why are so many crop circles happening there? I would point out, though, that there are crop circles that happen elsewhere, here in the United States and Canada, other parts in Europe. It seems to be mostly a northern hemisphere phenomenon, but not entirely. But researchers, their sense of this, their understanding of what's happening. Think of all these sacred sites in southern England. You know, the Stonehenge and Avebury Circle and Silbury Hill, and I mean, there are just so many sacred sites. Why were they located there? And the answer seems to be that there's an aquifer, underground aquifer, and there's chalk right above it, in you know, a layer of chalk. If you scratch the sod, you'll find it. And somehow, as water's percolating through and entering the aquifer, that seems to set up some strong electromagnetic currents that people who douse for energy, just like people douse for water, these people who douse for energy are actually able to experience. And I think that, you know, we can assume that our ancestors also were aware of these energies, and that's why they located their sacred sites where they did, right there in southern England. So either these sacred sites are being honored by the crop circles, or maybe even the energies are being used to create them. That's an open question. So now we've got some circles with, with rings inside them, right? Rings of crop that are still standing, and 3 of them in the same field in 1986. And once again, in ice, there's a moat, isn't there? See the people right there, to give you a sense of scale? If you were a team of humans, how would you have done that? Okay, how would you, because to cut it, well, and I mean, I suppose it's possible, but it does lead us to wonder, right? So in '88, this one was accompanied by an extremely large geomagnetic disturbance that was measured by instruments there. And now, Gerald Hawkins is a pretty bright guy. He was the head of the Boston University astronomy department, and he wrote this book, Stonehenge Decoded. He realized that that Stonehenge, back in the day, a few thousand years ago, I guess, when this was built, it was erected to be a primitive computer that would predict the eclipses and an astronomical calendar every year at the equinoxes and that sort of thing. You'd be able to see the sun at a certain place. So Gerald Hawkins became interested in crop circles, and he decided to measure all of the circles that had happened so far. So he would measure how large is this circle, how large is this ring, how large is that ring, and he compared all of those measurements, and he realized that when he compared them to each other, some were exactly twice the size of others. Some were exactly 50% larger, or 1 and a quarter times, 25% larger. Each of these ratios that correspond to the notes of a major scale were also found when he compared the crop circles one to the other, but none of the ratios that correspond to the sharps and flats were found when he compared them. Clearly, this means that there was a kind of a riddle that whatever intelligence has been making these, and they certainly are made by intelligence, intended for that riddle to be solved, or was hoping for somehow, but no one was coming out and saying it, right? Now, this one is quite different from what you've been seeing. As you can see, those plants, I mean, I wish you could see it because that's the closest I can get. I don't have any better photograph. But those plants aren't all down inside each of those 3 circles. Some of the plants are grouped, and there are 7 concentric rings and 48 spokes, which you can kind of vaguely see, right? The 7 concentric rings, the 48 spokes are much more difficult to see. How is that done? Well, some of the plants are in groups that are bent like this, some are bent like that, and some are bent like that. That is how that, now, how in the world would a team of people in the middle of the night been able to create that? 7 rings, 48 spokes in 3 different circles. Yes?
The musical part, you said it corresponds
Yes.
to not the sharps and flats. Do you mean literally it corresponded to just those, like C, D, E, F, G?
Right, so if you,
Not any major scale, but that.
no, what I mean is, this would have worked for any major scale. Then, that's a good question. So, in other words, in this key of E flat, okay, you still have certain notes: E flat, F, G, A flat, but but the ratio is the same when you compare those notes. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Right? Those are when I'm singing up the scale, I'm changing the pitch, and the pitch for every major scale has these ratios.
Because there's so many types of scales.
Right, there are 12 different scales, right, yeah. So back to this one, and Gerald Hawkins, the same fellow who realized the major scale was being represented by the sizes of those circles, he also discovered that, well, that's the Euclidean theorem, isn't it? This is one of the 4 Euclidean theorems, and there it is in the field. He even came up with the 5th Euclidean theorem himself. And now, it's not just the fact that all the plants are down inside this circle. You can see that the way that plants are down is very intricate, isn't it? They're swirled in the center. There's a swirl in the opposite direction around the room, and then these very precisely arranged quadrants, where the plants are either lying down like that or they're lying down like that. And all these are clearly made to be seen from the air. So you see, some quadrants look lighter than others depending on how they're reflecting the light. It seems to be part of the art, right? Now, in 1990, we start to get more elaborate. And in fact, here's an example of, apart from these circles here, there are also these very narrow orbital rings, which you see. They are so narrow that you wouldn't be able to walk inside them without making them wider. They're only a few plants wide, right? So you would disrupt the circle, but you would make it wider by walking inside it. This seems to prove that no one, in fact, did walk inside those circles and made them, flatten them mechanically or anything in order to make them. Excuse me? Oh, these are all in various crops in farmers' fields. So it could be wheat or barley or a whole variety of crops. Cheesefoot head, this formation, which it's been guessed perhaps this is a symbol of a vibrating tuning fork. And this one, I think, is kind of humorous, because here it is on Telegraph Hill, and doesn't this resemble a message, like a telegraph message, with something beaming, right? These arcs here, beaming a message out to space or out to a destination. Now, here's a picture of a fellow. This fellow discovered this crop circle. He happened upon it. He said, "Okay, take my picture in front of it." And as the photographer was taking the picture, this sphere fell, narrowly missing his head, right in front of him. Here's a magnification of it. Large quantities of these metal spheres were found on the edge of this field. Now, what's going on here? Well, could it be that the energy that created the crop formation also was still making these things fall from the sky? Okay, perhaps there's a meteor that was passing overhead that had been in the way of these energies that had been being beamed down to create those patterns. Now let's look at one of these patterns here, and we can see that they're very neat. I need to explain here that these parallel lines are called tram lines. In Britain, they call a truck a tram. And so in the fields, they want to be able to, predictably go in certain places, but they don't want to be driving all over their fields, so they stay inside those tram lines when they're when they're spraying the fields or when they're harvesting or whatever they need to do. So clearly this is, and so that gives you an idea of the scale. These tram lines are the width of a chassis, the width of a truck. Now, you can see that these are very neatly created circles and straight lines, creating these rectangles here, and this rectangle here, which was right inside one of the tram lines. But what you don't see, unless you really sit down, and if you have the mind to do this sort of thing, you would discover that there is actually a large and sophisticated pattern with 3 5-pointed stars, several circles, other than the circles that are already there. In other words, what happened was that, and again, I'm not going to say who or what source of intelligence this is, but clearly there's a design that creates that. Well, let's look at this first step, just for a sake of explanation. If you make a circle, and this is the center of the circle, and make the circle exactly the right size so that it touches the edge of this circle, and then you create a 5-point star inside that circle and make it just so, right? Get one of those arms of the 5-pointed star right on the center line there. Look at what's happening here. It exactly touches the corner of this rectangle, exactly touches the corner of that rectangle, and exactly touches at 5 points the perimeter of the circle, doesn't it? Now what that means is that this circle had to be exactly that size and had to be exactly that distance from here. Otherwise, that wouldn't work, would it? These quote-unquote coincidences are not coincidences at all, right? It's part of the plan. And so you can see that at every other stage, there are other circles, you look at these other points where the rectangles and the corners of the rectangles are touched, and you get the idea how this is a pattern. And then these circles and rectangles were created using that pattern, and then the pattern was basically erased. Because when we see the formation, we don't see all those circles and 5-pointed stars, do we? So that's part of the plan, if you will. And this is the final result. But sometimes these things are just plain beautiful. I mean, here we have a monument. This is clearly a man-made monument inside, in the landscape with a circle around it. Here we have a circle that seems to be a stand-in for the monument. Doesn't it symbolize the monument with a circle around it to echo that circle? In July 1990, this was so extraordinary that people gave it a